Have you ever looked at a woman who lives alone, no boyfriend, no partner, and silently wondered, what's wrong with her? She doesn't look like she's searching. She doesn't seem broken. She isn't trying to be noticed. So, why is she alone? Let me offer you something that might make you uncomfortable. She's not missing anything. She's not lonely. She's not incomplete. She's full. And it's that fullness, the unapologetic presence of a woman who needs no one to feel whole, that unsettles the world more than any absence ever could. This is not a woman who retreated into solitude because she gave up. This is a woman who chose it consciously, deliberately, defiantly. And that choice? That terrifies people. Because when a woman no longer shapes herself around the expectations of others, she begins to disrupt something deeper than social norms. She begins to shatter the very logic that holds together the fragile myths we've built about femininity, love, and dependency. She stops asking for validation, stops apologizing for being too much, or too little, or too quiet, or too strong. She stops trying to be digestible, and in doing so, she becomes dangerous. Not in the way that wounds, in the way that awakens. This kind of woman isn't here to play the roles we've written for her. She doesn't want to be your fantasy, your project, or your savior story. She's not here to be fixed or pursued or rescued. She's here to be. Carl Jung once said, "Everything we deny in ourselves becomes part of our shadow." Maybe that's why women like her, women who live unapologetically, outside the script, create such visceral discomfort. They mirror back to us everything we've buried. Our unmet desires, our repressed rage, our longing for freedom. She is the shadow of every woman who stayed too long, who said yes when she wanted to scream no, who bent herself into shapes that pleased others but fractured her soul in the process. She is what many secretly wish to become, but fear they'll be punished for choosing. And that fear, it's valid. Because the world doesn't reward women for choosing themselves. It rewards them for self-sacrifice, for availability, for performing wholeness while bleeding inside. But this woman, this misunderstood woman, doesn't perform anymore. She chooses silence over noise, solitude over chaos, integrity over approval. And in doing so, she becomes a mirror that some people can't bear to look into. She doesn't chase love. She doesn't wait to be chosen. She doesn't beg for belonging. She is the belonging. Her presence speaks louder than any introduction. Her boundaries speak clearer than any explanation. And her absence when she leaves echoes longer than most people's company ever did. You might not understand her. That's okay. She's not here to be understood. She's here to be whole. And wholeness is rarely comfortable. So the next time you see a woman walking alone, don't ask what's missing from her life. Ask yourself why her completeness feels like a threat. Carl Jung once said, "Individuation begins with stepping away from the crowd." For many women, that first step isn't loud. It doesn't come with applause or approval. It often comes in silence, with a decision to stop searching for someone else to complete them and instead begin the slow, powerful work of coming home to themselves. The woman who lives alone is not broken. She's not discarded, forgotten, or left behind. She's not sitting in a room full of regrets, longing for someone to come and rescue her. She's not abandoned. She's becoming. There's a difference between being alone and being abandoned. One is a wound, the other is a choice. One keeps you longing, the other sets you free. But the world doesn't always know the difference. Because when a woman walks away from the chase, when she stops trying to be desired, stops performing love, stops apologizing for needing more, people assume she's lost. What they fail to understand is that this woman hasn't given up on love. She's just stopped begging for it. She's no longer waiting for someone to choose her. She's choosing herself every single day. And that choice, while invisible to most, is a radical act of self-respect. It starts quietly. Maybe she just gets tired of one-sided effort, of empty promises, of relationships that ask her to shrink. Maybe she wakes up one morning and doesn't recognize the woman in the mirror. Or maybe it comes gradually, like a soft, persistent whisper. There's more than this. And so, she begins, not with declarations or drama, but with subtle decisions, She says no when she used to say yes. She cancels plans that feel draining. She stops chasing closure. She stops explaining her worth. She learns to sit with silence, to breathe in her own company. And at first, that silence can feel brutal. The absence of noise, of validation, of the familiar chaos, it can feel like something's missing. But slowly, something shifts. The silence becomes a sanctuary. And in that space, she begins to hear her own voice again. What happens when a woman no longer needs romantic love to feel valuable? What happens when she stops measuring her worth by how wanted she is? What happens when her reflection becomes her own mirror, not someone else's opinion? The answers aren't always easy, because this journey demands truth. It asks her to revisit all the versions of herself she created just to be accepted. It requires her to grieve the stories she told, the ones where she'd be saved, chosen, adored into wholeness. It hurts to let those stories die, but in their place, something new begins to grow. Something rooted, something real. She doesn't become bitter. She becomes clear. She doesn't close her heart. She reclaims it. She doesn't turn her back on connection. She just refuses to betray herself for it anymore. There's a strength in that kind of solitude that can't be faked. A calm that doesn't need to prove anything. And a dignity that isn't loud, but unmistakable. This woman is not waiting for life to begin. She's living it on her own terms. And if she chooses love again, it won't be out of lack. It won't be because she's lonely or afraid or chasing a fairy tale. It will be because she has something to share, not something to fix. She'll choose someone who sees her not, someone who needs her to disappear to feel strong, someone who can meet her, not complete her. And until that happens, she's not in limbo. She's not stuck. She's in process, because real healing isn't linear. Sometimes it looks like stillness, like quiet weekends, like deep breaths, like soft boundaries, like long walks and longer silences. It looks like choosing peace over performance, like choosing discomfort now to avoid devastation later. Integration takes time, to gather all the fragmented parts, to bring them home, to remember that you are not too much, that your needs are not unreasonable, that your voice deserves space. So, ask yourself, what if your alone season isn't punishment? What if it's preparation? What if it's the most sacred chapter of your becoming? The woman who walks this path does so without a map, but she's guided by something deeper, an inner knowing, a pull towards something more authentic. And that authenticity will cost her. It always does. It costs approval, familiarity, the illusion of safety. But what she gains in return is everything: self-respect, clarity, peace, a life that finally feels like hers. So no, being alone isn't failure. It isn't loneliness wrapped in pride. It's transformation. It's her becoming her own home. And if that makes others uncomfortable, so be it. She didn't come here to be understood. She came here to be whole. There comes a point when a woman stops running, not from the world, not from others, but from herself. That's when the work begins. The deep, quiet, terrifying, liberating work that Carl Jung called shadow work. The shadow, as Jung defined it, is everything within us that we have denied, rejected, or buried. It's the parts of ourselves we were told were too much or not enough. The anger we were taught to suppress. The longing we learned to shame. The dreams we abandoned to survive. The truth we silenced just to be loved. Shadow work isn't glamorous. It doesn't make for pretty stories or easy conversations. It's raw. It's uncomfortable. It's the fire that burns through illusions. And for many women, that fire begins in solitude. Not the kind of solitude that isolates, but the kind that reveals. When a woman chooses to be alone, she's not closing the door on the world. She's opening one within herself. A door that's been locked for years, maybe decades. Behind it is everything she's been taught to avoid: her pain, her rage, her unmet needs, her authentic voice. And once she steps through that door, there's no going back. She doesn't cry because she's weak. She cries because, for once, she chose not to lie to herself. That's what shadow work does. It strips away the performance. It demands honesty. It says, no more pretending. At first, it feels like chaos. Old memories rise like smoke. Words once swallowed start screaming in her throat. Feelings she buried deep begin to move in her body. And for a while, everything hurts. She remembers the time she said yes when everything inside her screamed no. She remembers the moment she chose silence over truth just to keep the peace. She remembers the day she looked in the mirror and couldn't recognize the face staring back. And in that remembering, she begins to feel again. Not numbness, not noise, but the truth. Truth without apology. Truth without dilution. This is not easy work. It breaks her open in ways she didn't expect. But in those broken places, light begins to seep through. Because shadow work isn't just about pain, it's about reclamation. She starts to reclaim her boundaries, her anger, her voice, her intuition. She begins to say things she's never allowed herself to say. I'm tired of performing. I'm done abandoning myself. I want more, and I'm no longer ashamed of that. These words don't come gently. They come with trembling hands and a pounding heart. But they come, and they change everything. She realizes the relationships that once felt safe were built on self-betrayal. She sees how often she's minimized her needs to keep others comfortable. She notices the patterns, the ones she thought were fate that were actually just repetition. And in that noticing, she starts to wake up. Not suddenly, but steadily. Shadow work doesn't ask her to become someone new. It asks her to return to who she was before the world told her who to be. She begins to integrate the parts of herself she once disowned, the softness that felt unsafe, the strength that was called too much, the intuition that was dismissed, the desire that was labeled selfish. Integration is the goal, not perfection, not purity, but wholeness. And wholeness includes everything: the light and the dark, the wounds and the wisdom, the silence and the scream. She no longer runs from discomfort. She sits with it. She listens. She asks, "What are you trying to teach me?" And slowly, what once felt unbearable becomes familiar. The fear becomes a doorway. The grief becomes a guide. The rage becomes fuel. She stops blaming others for not saving her. Not because they were right to leave, but because she finally realized she was never meant to be rescued. She was meant to rise. But rise from what? From the ashes of old identities, from the ruins of relationships built on fear, from the roles that kept her small. Shadow work burned her, yes, but it also forged her into someone real, someone rooted, someone who can hold complexity without breaking. She's not afraid of her darkness anymore, because now she understands it. Now she respects it. Now she knows that the fire didn't destroy her. It purified her. And through that fire, she found something she never knew she was missing: herself. The woman who emerges from shadow work doesn't come back needing less. She comes back demanding more. Not more attention, more truth. Not more affection, more depth. Not more noise, more presence. She becomes someone who no longer flinches at her reflection. Someone who doesn't chase closure from others because she's learned to give it to herself. Someone who no longer begs to be chosen because she finally chose herself. This is what it means to be free. Not to be untouched by pain, but to no longer be ruled by it. And if you've ever wondered why some women walk away from the noise, the roles, the expectation sits, not because they're lost, it's because they're ready. Ready to meet themselves, ready to remember what was buried, ready to become someone they've never been allowed to be. They're not retreating, they're returning, not to the world, but to the truth that's been waiting inside them all along. That's the fire, and that's the freedom. Silence can be deafening, especially when the world expects noise. For a woman who chooses silence, who no longer plays by the rules of romantic urgency, who steps out of the game everyone else is so desperate to win, that silence is not absence. It is a ritual. It is not a void to be filled. It is a sacred space to be honored. The woman who lives in silence does not retreat from life. She reclaims it. She stops reaching outward. She no longer scans the room for someone to validate her existence. She no longer calculates her worth based on attention, affection, or who texts first. Instead, she begins to listen inward. At first, that silence can feel sharp. It cuts through the distractions she used to cling to. Without the drama, the longing, the constant feedback loops. She is left alone with the one voice she's ignored the most her own. And that voice is quiet at first. Whispers, memories, truths she buried under performance. Stillness, for her, is not a passive state. It is an active confrontation, a choice to stop chasing and start listening. She unplugs from the need to be desired. She unhooks herself from the loop of proving, pleasing, persuading. She lets go of the story that says a woman's power lies in how wanted she is. And in that letting go, something extraordinary happens. She begins to feel again not just emotions, but intuition, not just thought, but knowing. The kind of knowing that doesn't need to be confirmed or explained. Stillness becomes her teacher, her healer, her mirror. This is the kind of silence that speaks louder than any love story ever could, because it's not about romance, it's about reunion. A reunion with the parts of her that got silenced every time she lowered her voice to be liked. Every time she said, "It's okay," when it wasn't. Every time she smiled to hide the ache of being unseen. This silence is where she meets the self she abandoned while chasing love. It's where she finally hears the question that was always there beneath the noise. Who am I when no one is looking? And the answer doesn't come quickly. It doesn't come in a single epiphany. It comes slowly like a tide, washing away what's false, revealing what was always there. She realizes she's not lonely. She's full. She's not avoiding love, she's redefining it. Love, to her now, is not adrenaline or anxiety. It's peace. It's presence. It's alignment. She's not silent because she has nothing to say. She's silent because what she's discovering cannot be spoken in shallow conversations. It cannot be shared with someone who only listens to respond. This is soul work, and it requires space. So she clears the clutter. The almost lovers. The on-again, off-again maybes. The friends who only come around when she's entertaining. The noise disguised as connection. She stops filling time with distractions, and she begins to fill it with meaning. Morning stillness, long walks, books that don't pretend, journals full of questions with no easy answers. She slows down. She watches the way her body responds to quiet. She notices how certain thoughts rise when the phone stays silent. And in those moments, she meets her true self, not the curated one, not the performing one, but the raw, rooted, radiant self that has nothing to prove. This is what reclamation looks like. Not a loud declaration, not a performance of strength, but a quiet refusal to betray herself again. And yes, people will misunderstand her. They'll call her cold, distant, closed off. They'll say she's bitter, or hiding, or afraid. But they'll be wrong. She's not hiding. She's healing. She's not afraid. She's finally fearless. And no, she's not cold. She's burning quietly with clarity, with courage, with presence. This silence she lives in isn't empty. It's sacred. It's the kind of silence that rebuilds you from the inside out. The kind that breaks the cycles you didn't even know you were repeating. The kind that teaches you the difference between comfort and truth. She no longer needs the buzz of constant attention. She no longer craves the chase, because she's found something better. She's found alignment. And alignment feels like peace, like knowing your own rhythm, like not compromising your soul for temporary companionship. So when she smiles now, it's not to be liked, it's because she likes herself. When she speaks, it's not to fill the air, it's to add meaning to it. When she's quiet, it's not because she has nothing to say, it's because silence is sometimes the most honest thing she can offer. There's power in that kind of restraint. There's beauty in that kind of presence. And when the world around her keeps spinning, rushing, shouting, demanding, she becomes the still point, the calm center, the reminder that depth doesn't need volume to be felt. So if you ever meet a woman who lives in silence, don't assume she's incomplete. She might be more whole than anyone you've ever known, because she's no longer living for applause. She's living in alignment. And that speaks louder than love. There is a reason why a self-possessed woman unsettles people. It's not because she's aggressive. It's not because she's cold. It's because she is no longer compliant. She doesn't bend to make others comfortable. She doesn't apologize for her space, her truth, or her strength. And that kind of presence is not a threat. It's a mirror. It reflects back everything society told women not to be. Unshakable, clear, untamed. Enough. What you call intimidating, she calls integrity. What you label too much, she recognizes as wholeness. What you see as distance, she knows as boundaries. This is the feminine power they don't want you to know because it can't be controlled, commodified, or manipulated. It doesn't exist to serve the ego of others. It doesn't need to be fixed or explained. It just is. And that's the most disruptive thing a woman can be, fully herself. Carl Jung once said, "Where convention rules, there's little room for authenticity." Convention told her to be agreeable, to smile politely, to shrink, to wait, to please. But she grew tired of living in fragments, tired of choosing between being accepted and being real. So, she chose herself. And with that choice, she broke the spell. She no longer lives for validation. She lives from alignment. She's not here to fit into the mold. She's here to melt it down and build something honest from the ashes. She knows the system wasn't designed for her wholeness. It was designed for her obedience. So she stopped asking for permission. She stopped softening her power so others wouldn't feel small. She stopped editing herself just to be tolerated. And yes, the world called her cold. But what they call cold is actually her clarity. The line she drew in the sand wasn't to exclude anyone. It was to protect what she spent years rebuilding: her sense of self, her energy, her worth. That boundary isn't bitterness, it's wisdom, because she's learned. She's been drained, dismissed, diminished. She's been told to lower her standards. She's been told she's too picky, too proud, too independent. But what they call pride is her refusal to beg for love. What they call pickiness is her knowing she is not here to be chosen by just anyone. And what they call independence is simply this: she does not fear her own company. Let's be honest. A woman who no longer needs to be needed is dangerous to every structure built on her silence. She dismantles the narratives that say her value is in sacrifice, that her purpose is in being pleasing, that her role is to complete someone else's life. She doesn't want to complete anyone. She wants to walk beside someone whole. And until that happens, she walks alone, not out of bitterness, but out of loyalty to her own soul. She no longer competes. She no longer performs. She no longer waits. This is the wild woman rising, the one who refuses to collapse herself into someone else's expectations. She's the one who no longer makes herself smaller to fit inside someone else's idea of worthy. She's not unreachable. She's just no longer available for what dishonors her. There's a line between being open and being exposed. She knows the difference now. She opens slowly, with discernment, with depth, with intention. Not because she's guarded, but because she's sacred. And sacred things are not for everyone. This isn't about superiority. It's about sovereignty. She's not trying to be above anyone. She's simply no longer willing to fall beneath herself. That kind of woman is a disruptor. She doesn't need a stage to be seen. She doesn't need noise to be heard. Her presence alone shifts the room because it speaks of something ancient, something forgotten. The power of a woman who remembers who she is. She may not speak loudly, but her clarity roars. She may not fight with words, but her boundaries are steel. She may not demand attention, but people cannot look away. Why? Because deep down, everyone feels it. The quiet certainty of someone who is no longer performing, someone who has nothing to prove, someone who came home to herself and stayed. If you've ever felt like that woman, if you've ever felt yourself outgrowing roles, rules, and relationships that once defined you, if you've ever looked around and realized you can no longer participate in anything that makes you betray yourself, that's not you losing your way. That's you remembering it. There's a reason they didn't teach you this kind of power. Because once you taste it, you don't go back. You stop settling. You stop shrinking. You stop waiting for permission to be who you've always been. This is your reminder. You are not too much. You are not too late. You are not wrong for wanting more. Your truth is not an inconvenience. Your standards are not arrogance. Your voice is not a threat. It's a signal to every other woman who's still doubting, still dimming, still dancing around her worth, that she can stop now. She can take up space. She can speak with her full voice. She can live as her full self. Because nothing is more powerful than a woman who has learned to trust her own fire. And nothing is more revolutionary than a woman who no longer fears her own reflection. She's not waiting, not for love, not for permission, not for the world to catch up to who she's become. She's arriving. Every choice she's made to step away, to grow in silence, to walk alone. It wasn't retreat. It was return. A return to herself. A reclamation of everything she once gave away too easily. She no longer stands at the threshold, hoping to be invited in. She builds her own door. She opens it when she's ready. And she welcomes only what honors the fullness she's fought to reclaim. If you've made it this far, maybe you feel something stirring inside you too. A quiet knowing, a recognition, a yes that lives beneath your skin. So let me ask you, have you ever chosen silence not out of weakness, but as a way back to yourself? Have you ever stepped away from love or not because you stopped believing in it, but because you finally believed in yourself more? Have you ever been called cold, distant, hard to love, when in truth, you were simply done performing? If any of this feels like your story, I invite you to leave a trace, not because you owe anyone an explanation, but because your voice might be the spark someone else needs to hear. Comment below and share just a line, a sentence, a reflection. This space is not for noise. It's for resonance. This channel exists to walk beside you, not ahead of you, not to fix, not to push, but to witness, to hold space for the wild, soulful, permissionless path you're carving. You don't have to arrive loudly. You don't need applause to be worthy. You just have to keep becoming. She's not waiting. She's already home. And maybe, so are you.